Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. I guess most people will be joining virtually, or at least in a recorded format because of some technical difficulties. But I am absolutely thrilled to be able to go out to the 4th Congressional District, Southwestern Connecticut, with some truly amazing resources. The Library of Congress, I think, is one of the crown jewels of the United States government. Just one of my favorite destinations in Washington for all sorts of different reasons. And we've got two of the leaders of the Library of Congress to talk with us today on a topic that I hope and that I know is really important to everybody right now. And that is going to be what kind of resources are available through the library to assist number one, librarians out there. There's 17 towns and cities in the in the 4th Congressional District of Connecticut, all of which have their own libraries. And of course, we are right in the middle now of figuring out exactly how children will return and students will return to school. And the Library of Congress has an unparalleled array of assets and resources that will hopefully help inspire and make more comprehensive the kind of education that our students can get at this very odd time. And so I'm not the expert, so I just want to start with the introductions here and let you know who you will be speaking with. We've got both the Librarian of Congress and Ms. Leanne Potter, who directs the Office of Learning and Innovation at the library. We're going to start with the Librarian of Congress, however. And Librarian, thank you so much for being with us. And by way of quick introduction, Dr. Carla Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress. And think about that, 14th Librarian of Congress in 200 plus years. She was sworn in September of 2016, nominated by President Barack Obama, confirmed by the Senate in 2016, and has a lifetime of both academic and practical work in the library sciences, having come to the Library of Congress from the Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland, having served on the National Museum and Library Services Board, and working in the Chicago Public Libraries for much of her career, decades of experience, and a truly historic figure. Dr. Hayden is not only the first woman to be Librarian of Congress of those 14, but also the first African-American to lead the National Library. And I could not be happier to have Dr. Hayden with us this afternoon. She will do a more, after she makes a brief presentation, she will do a more robust introduction of Ms. Leanne Potter, who directs the Office of Learning and Innovation at the library. And she and her team are full-time dedicated to developing programming and materials for educators to help inspire and engage students, drawing, of course, on the incomparable treasures and assets and resources that the library has. So with that, let me express my deep gratitude to Dr. Carla Hayden and to Ms. Leanne Potter. Dr. Hayden, I'll turn this over to you. And again, thank you for being with us here virtually in the state of Connecticut.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and especially for that kind introduction, because if you will note that library is the common theme throughout the introduction, and to be the Librarian of Congress, which is a national treasure chest, we call it. It has 836 miles of shelving. It has 171 million items, the collections of 23 presidents, as well as 36 Supreme Court justices, the collections of Frederick Douglass, Mary Church Terrell, Susan B. Anthony, the Wright brothers, Harry Houdini, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. All of these wonderful treasures to give people a sense of history, but also giving everyone a worldwide view. The Library of Congress actually collects in 470 languages. So you have materials from all over the world and in so many languages. And what we've been doing in the last few years in particular is making sure that these resources, as many as possible, are available virtually. And Congressman, as you have invited us to share, we know that libraries everywhere are sources of knowledge and opportunity. And the Library of Congress wants to make sure that people know that they can use the resources that we have put together and put out in this virtual world, because this is a very challenging time. And I know that many of my library colleagues are having difficulties because they are closed physically, just like the Library of Congress. And so we have put together on one spot on our website, loc.gov, a part called Engage, E-N-G-A-E. And it includes things like the National Book Festival. Last year, if you can think about it, the Library of Congress sponsored 200,000 people in one spot in a convention center with over 100 authors. Well, this year, the virus had other plans. And what it has done is allowed us to have a virtual National Book Festival that will be broadcast on PBS with a connection also to YouTube. And we will still have over 100 authors, and First Lady Laura Bush, who started it 20 years ago, will be there, as well as different authors that you will recognize, including Dave Pilkey, the author of Captain Underpants and Dogman. And all of you who have worked with young people know that he is a superstar, as well as John Meacham and so many others. And that will be a virtual National Book Festival that will be broadcast the weekend of September 25th. But also we have a series online about race in America. And it's in combination with the Smithsonian Institution. And you will hear conversations about that. Also some things for families. And on that same page, if you just click families, you will see all types of activities. Cooking with history. The Library of Congress has the world's largest collection of cookbooks. And so we have put together an activity part because we know that families are facing a lot of challenges as well with the young people at home, and they need trusted sources of activities and things that can engage. And so we have a number of things for families. We are asking people to also help us during this time. We have a lot of documents, historic documents, that we are asking people to help us transcribe. And that includes letters to Abraham Lincoln that haven't been seen since 1862 when they were sent to him. All of these types of things we're putting up and asking people to help us transcribe. We also have Ask a Librarian. And that's something that will allow you to engage in real time with our librarians to help you navigate some of the things at our collections. And then the exhibits. One of the aspects about the virtual world is that you get to sometimes miss wonderful in-person exhibits that had just opened. There was one, Shall Not Be Denied, about women's suffrage, and also a wonderful exhibit about Rosa Parks. Well, we put those online with tours of our curators taking you through the exhibits, and we have related programming with that. Speaking of related programming, Dr., and I always call her Dr., Leanne Potter, and she always corrects me because she has so much experience with education and being a teacher and knowing what teachers need and how they could use our 61 million items that are digitized. So for the last few years, Leanne Potter and her team have been working on ready-made kits and activities for teachers, including professional development. And Congressman, is it okay if I segue to Leanne?
Please do. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Hayden.
You bet. Well, thank you, Dr. Hayden. I love that you gave such a good overview of the wide variety of materials that are available. And I want to talk specifically about the library's page that is specific to teachers. And it's real simple. It's www.loc.gov/teachers. And as you can imagine, we have tried to make available a variety of resources available through that portal on the library's website to a wide variety of materials that serve purposes across the curriculum. There's sort of an assumption that primary sources play a role in history classrooms, which they absolutely do, but we are convinced that primary sources can also play a role in every one of our subject matter. So across the curriculum, across the grade spectrum, there is a little something for everyone from the library. And if you go to the teachers page, you can access what we call primary source sets, which are sort of subsets of those 61 million objects on the library's website that make them a little bit more manageable, because those primary source sets are arranged according to topics that are taught in school. And what we do in a primary source set is identify around a dozen to 15 objects from the collection and put them together, wrapped in some contextual information and a teacher's guide that provides some suggestions on how these resources might be put to use in a classroom setting, or like we are right now, in a virtual classroom setting. There are also resources on the teacher's page that include actual lesson plans that have been developed, but more often than not, what teachers are asking us for are suggestions on approaches that they might take, not necessarily a step-by-step, do it this way, but really more of a, this is what I'm teaching, what have you got? And so we have a blog that is just for teachers. It's the Teaching with Library of Congress blog. And today's feature actually points to a really terrific interview that was with Jason Reynolds, who is the current National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. And he recently chose a new portrait of himself that he is using as part of his ambassadorship. And the portrait's a little bit different than the ones we're used to seeing, because Jason's got this amazing smile, and in this portrait, he's very serious. And what we've done in today's blog is talk about what do portraits tell us about the individual in them and the decisions that we make when we're getting our picture taken. And really, we're thinking that this post could be ideal for those moments just a couple of weeks from now when schools are trying to figure out, okay, what do we do about school photos this year? And really, those are the kinds of questions that we're getting from teachers about, okay, oh, actually, this is a good idea. This is going to allow me to have a conversation that I hadn't even thought about having. And these materials might make available some opportunities. So there's our teachers page, there's our teachers blog. And as Dr. Hayden described, the Engage website, as well as our loc.gov/families website, is providing some opportunities for people to do some exploring of the library's website to find materials that really speak to them. And earlier, I was talking with one of your staffers, and I was asking about the communities in your district. And I went into the Chronicling America database, which is historic newspapers. And for those of you who've never explored Chronicling America, I'm just warning you that you will get lost. You get kind of roped into it. If you go into the Chronicling America website and you do a search simply on Bridgeport, Connecticut, one of the things you're going to find is a newspaper that was going to, I'm checking my notes, was called the Bridgeport Evening Farmer. And it was published from 1866 to 1917. And every single issue of that newspaper is apparently available through Chronicling America. And we were laughing about how since we've been home, we've been doing some online shopping. And if you look at those historic newspapers, one of the things you can do is read about the sales that were going on in Bridgeport at the turn of the century, and look at the advertisements. And honestly, these are opportunities for parents or caregivers and teachers and young people to do some exploring that really is unique to our communities. It's really important that we emphasize that while the Library of Congress is certainly the Library of Congress, it is also our nation's library. And everything in the Library of Congress belongs to the American people and has a relationship to the American people. So when you go into, whether you're in the Chronicling America database or you're on the main library website, you do a search on Bridgeport, you will be amazed at what you find. You'll find maps, you'll find photographs, you'll find instances where individuals whose papers are in the Library of Congress make reference to our communities. And learning about our connections to our past and to our nation's library is really kind of a fun thing to do. So we encourage that. And I feel like I've been doing a fire hose thing, so I'm going to stop for a minute and just let you ask us some questions, then we'll tell you more good stories about why you ought to explore the library's website.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, good. I've been given a couple of questions that people have out there. I'm not sure we have the technology mastered yet to let them ask you directly, but I've been given a few. So let me run a few by you. And Dr. Hayden, I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna give you a fair warning here. My question, I'll let you think about this because I don't want to ambush at you, but you've been librarian for a little while now. The last question I'm going to ask you is, what is the most surprising thing that you discovered in the Library of Congress? But we'll come back to that.
Oh, I can tell you that. I can tell you. You've teased.
Okay, good. Well, we'll come back to that. Let's stay a little bit more practical right now. So I think one important question for both of you is a very practical question. So here you have you have human knowledge, but the question is, how does somebody access it? So for example, a parent of a child, and let me give two examples. One's a little more esoteric than the other, but a child goes to see Hamilton and gets really inspired by the show and wants to learn more about Hamilton. Tell us a little bit about the way in, because you've got so much that it could be challenging. It's pretty easy to type in Hamilton into a Google search. Most parents would know about Khan Academy. That's pretty well indexed. But what about a kid who gets really inspired by the show and wants to learn more about Hamilton? So that's maybe a more fun. The more esoteric one is, and maybe this is a little bit more in the Khan Academy type way of thinking about things, but a student is struggling with mathematics, with let's just say geometry. What has the library got to offer for a student who either wants a little bit of help or wants to better understand or see around some of the concepts? I'm going on too long about this, but it's really a question of how can a parent access the library's resources with a very specific question offered up by a student?
I'll take the first part about getting in, and especially with something like Hamilton. The main entry point, of course, is LOC, libraryofcongress.gov, and then / put in Alexander Hamilton, put in collections, but be specific about what person or city or topic that you want, and then the library website will show you what's in prints and photographs, what's in my manuscripts. And Leanne mentioned that it can be very engaging because it is online shopping in a way. You'll say, well, do you want to see photos of Alexander Hamilton, or drawings? How about the letters that he wrote? Well, there's the last letter from Eliza. And something that we just put up on our website was a live, what did they call, a watch party for Hamilton. It was a cooperative thing with New York Public, the National Archives, the Smithsonian, and the Library of Congress. And during a showing of Hamilton, we all had a history throwdown, During parts of the show, we put up our documents that we had from our collections. So you will be able to, your main entry point will be that website, and to then engage with the young person about, well, what do you think? That's a good activity right there. And in terms of specific things like science, and Leanne was a science teacher as well, but also math and help, Leanne's got some things for that.
I'm glad you mentioned all that, Dr. Hayden. I did add to our chat, and I know this will be included in the recording, the direct link to the Alexander Hamilton papers. Again, wonderful place to explore. And another, one of our primary source sets on our teachers page is also focused on the Hamilton papers. As you can imagine, the lyrics to the songs in the Broadway musical weren't all made up. Some of the lyrics really do come from the original sources, and we love the thought that kids are exploring those resources and really being inspired to create some of their own. We have lots of examples where the manuscript collections really are inspiring, and the exploring of them is definitely worthwhile. And you mentioned math specifically. The library holds the papers of the Wright brothers, And the Wright brothers were doing some serious math. And what's great about their papers is they talk through their math problems. My husband happens to be an aerospace engineer, and it's the one collection that I can absolutely get him sucked into. And so I know that math types love those papers. We also have the papers of Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell also did an awful lot of math and included his computation in his papers. We find computation in all kinds of interesting places throughout the library's collections. Thomas Jefferson was doing math related to using an eclipse to figure out the exact latitude and longitude of his home. We have instances where, again, in the Jefferson papers related to the Lewis and Clark expedition and Lewis and Clark going shopping and keeping track of what they were purchasing and ultimately asking Congress to pay for. So there are papers all throughout the library's collections that address math concepts. And I'm also really excited to mention that the Library of Congress participates in a program that is sponsored by the Department of Energy called the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship. And for the last couple of years, we have hosted an Einstein Fellow, which is a classroom teacher who comes from either the math or the science world. And we host them at the library, and they help us ensure that the resources that we are developing for teachers in those disciplines really are useful. And we're excited because this year's Einstein Fellow is coming to us this week. So our first meeting with our new Einstein Fellow, Peter, is this Thursday, and Peter is a math teacher from the Chicago area. And we are so excited about welcoming him and letting him see things in the collections and how to use them in math classrooms that maybe we hadn't thought about. So we're real excited about that. So excited to say, welcome, Peter.
And also,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Congressman, I have to jump in and say that there are other instances of making connections to math in the Jonathan Larson collection. He's the young man that did the play and musical Rent. We have digitized his handwritten on yellow note paper, and Leanne is nodding and everything. His handwritten calculation for the song Seasons of Love that the Parkland kids sang at the Grammys, 900. We have his calculation in his hand when he was trying to come up.
That's great. As we like to refer to him in the state of Connecticut as the second most interesting John Larson, after Representative John Larson in the Connecticut 1st District.
We have his papers.
That's a great opening because like a lot of parents, certainly with two teenagers at home, it's not always necessarily about the academics, but I want to give you a launching off point here by saying some of the more memorable visits I've done to the library, and I'm going to ask you to expand on this, was to see one of the most amazing collections of American baseball memorabilia I've seen in a long time, and to stumble upon the fact that apparently you've got all of Bob Hope's jokes, not to mention a very large jazz collection. So if we just get a little bit out of the sort of history and mathematics realm, tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that maybe a teenager might consider a little bit more fun.
Well, one that we know that they would consider fun is our comic book collection and comic art. The Library of Congress has one of the largest collections of comic book and books and comic art. And so that collection alone is something. And I also mentioned Harry Houdini. So not only do we have Bob Hope's jokes, and he kept a file of his jokes by topic, you know, like baseball or something, I can throw a ball or whatever. We also have Harry Houdini's magic calculations and how he did things as well. And we have something that we just started. We had a innovator in residence, Brian Fu, who put together a lot of our recordings and film and started something that you can go on and become citizen DJ. And you can mix your own kind of hip hop or whatever kind of thing using some of the things from the library as well. So the baseball cards, we even have, and this is online, the scouting reports of Branch Rickey, who I'm a baseball fan. So for me, this was just something to see his assessment of Ernie Banks and Don Drysdale and all of these people. And one guy that we had to blanket out because he said, can't hit, can't run, don't sign. And that was all. So it's some really cool things like that. And Dave Pilkey, I mentioned the creator of Dogman and Captain Underpants, has a program with us just inviting young artists into his studio to make their own cartoons and graphic novels. And that Jason Reynolds has a program called Grab a Mic and Tell Your Story. So there are a lot of cool and fun things that you can see and do.
So I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it, Librarian, because I think we're all within 10 years of each other. But I just know that whatever teenagers are watching this right now, when you said comic books, they said, what is that? Is that on Instagram? Is that on TikTok? And I actually offer that up because it leads to my next question, which I think is really relevant to young people. And I do know that there's teenagers out there who read comic books still. But,
oh, yeah.
My question is, obviously our younger people are living their lives online now, whether it's social media, social media, TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. I probably don't even know the half of it. But so this is actually, I imagine, a pretty serious question for you. How do you think about both cataloging the immense richness of American life that is lived on these social media platforms and making it available to the public in a way that is, that is interesting, that is historical, that is entertaining?
We have started to really up our game with social media. And I mentioned the Hamilton Watch Party, and that was all through social media on Twitter. And we were tweeting and doing that, and we're doing more in terms of using those platforms to let people know, especially younger people, that, hey, we have these things. So when the movie Iron Man is being streamed or some of the things that are happening, we make sure that we get on social media and say, we have some of the drawings, or we have the manuscript for the new Wonder Woman script and things like that. So we are trying to connect, and we are very active on social media, and then putting the resources there and saying, look at this, this is a cool thing. So we know that that's where they're seeing it. And Jason Reynolds, our youth ambassador, is very active on social media, and also our poet laureates, and using poetry and getting them to make that connection. So we're on it. I'm the first librarian of Congress to tweet. And I do it every day and say, look at this, and it's based on things that are happening in the news. And we put up something from our collection that relates to it.
Congressman, my daughter's 17 and my son is 21 today. And I have to tell you about the one document that I have shared with them from the library's collection that has gotten them pretty excited about what we've got. It comes from the Alexander Graham Bell papers. And as you know, Alexander Graham Bell, we all know he invented the telephone, or got credit for inventing the telephone. And he, in his papers, is a letter that he wrote to Guillermo Marconi, who, of course, we associate with radio. And he wrote this letter in September of 1899. And he knew that Marconi was coming to America for a visit, and Alexander Graham Bell wanted to invite him up to his place in Nova Scotia. So he sends him a note basically saying, dear Marconi, I've been reading about what you've been doing with these radio and, these inventions and this research. I want to talk to you about some ideas I have about wireless telephony. And this is 1899, and Alexander Graham Bell is talking to Marconi about wireless telephones, and suddenly my kids were like, oh, Mom, I get it. I see why you're into this. These are the kinds of stories that if we introduce our kids to them, really believe we can get them excited to learn more and ask those questions about, wow, that's incredible. What happened next? That's what we want them to do. We want the library to be, like you said, we hold all this knowledge, but what we really want is to share all this knowledge so that our kids start thinking about, what am I going to add to this story? And how can I be inspired by what these other people did so that we can move forward? This is exciting. This is fun stuff. And comic books are good too.
Yeah, and there's hope in history. As
There
you know,
is.
Congressman, there's hope in history. And so when the whole thing with the space exploration came up, and a couple of weeks ago, we put up from the Carl Sagan papers, his 12-year-old rendition of what a space traveler would look like in his own hand. And so that making it, and back to those comic books, recently we had a special display of some of these historic comic books and things with the kids and young at heart from Comic-Con in Washington, D.C. And let's just say it was quite an interesting sight to see the Comic-Con participants coming up into the Library of Congress to see some of those gems. So just relating to popular culture and making those connections with history. And Leanne's point is so well taken, that we want them to think about, what will people 30, 40 years from now be looking at? And how can you be that creator? What can you do? And what will you be?
I love that, Dr. Hayden. I've never heard that there's hope in history. It resonates with me. If you do what I do, a historical understanding, and I suspect this is probably true for everybody, but a historical understanding is absolutely critical. You know, in somewhat chaotic times, you can understand where we are a whole lot better if you understand that there's kind of nothing new under the sun, right? And just, I mean, we're talking about the conversation about immigrants, which has been pretty ferocious.
Oh my God.
We see that every 30 or 40 years in this country, and it's usually a different group of immigrants, but it's nothing new. You know, an isolationist, we're probably in an isolationist moment right now that disturbs lots of people. It pleases others, but again, it's not new. I just finished reading a biography of Winston Churchill, you know, about thinking about the pressures that were on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Nobody looks back now and says, boy, it was a bad idea for the U.S. to get involved in World War II. But at the time, so anyway, that's my own little advertisement for the value, the practical value of history. Understanding where we are today is a lot easier if you understand that we kind of been here before. But I like that.
Right.
I like
and then it's okay. And Congressman, the thing, and you have Jay Wilkie's book behind you, 1941, about that, and the fact that it was so difficult to think about joining a world war. And the thing that really helps is to see that the country and people have been through things before, and you can make it through. And that's where that hope comes from. That was really something. And to do those things without the telephone, without all of the things that we have now, the Civil War.
Yeah.
Let
me take us in one other direction that we haven't gone too far in, but I think this will be interesting to our viewers. Let's talk a little bit about audio and video. What kind of resources are there? I mean, Americans are used to thinking Spotify, Netflix. What's the Library of Congress version of Spotify and Netflix?
Well, we have two. We have a national jukebox, and that's some of the recordings that we have from Lead Belly and all of these different musicians and different things, and also movies. Classic movies that are online as well. And so people can get on through our digital collections, just loc.gov, and you can put in that. So we have those types of things. And also a reading room that's online where you can actually interact with the collections directly. And Leanne, did you have some that you wanted to bring out?
I did. I was adding a couple of things to our chat, so we'll make sure we capture these. You mentioned the National Jukebox and, of course, historic sound recordings. We also have a thing called the National Screening Room, and our colleagues in the Motion Picture and Broadcast Sound Division at the library have been creating this part of the library's website that includes all kinds of film footage. Some of the very earliest Edison films are available through the National Jukebox. There are also some early sitcoms that are available. There are some commercials. That famous commercial involving the young lady and the daisy is available through the National Jukebox. That's another section of the library's website that continues to grow as more and more of those audiovisual collections are digitized. That's where they will be living. So getting to know the National Jukebox as well as the National Screening Room, great resources.
And things like home movies too.
Yeah.
Leanne, the home movies. We have Jerry Lewis's home movies. And one, he used to, the great comedian and film producer and everything, he used to take and cast his neighbors like Tony Curtis and Vivian Lee in movies. And we have those. And plus his movies, home movies of Liza Minnelli at 2 years old with her mother, Judy Garland, at a birthday party. So all of those things are up there too.
And those items that we've mentioned are items that are part of the library's collections, but the library also has other kinds of recordings of events that have occurred at the library and events related to past national book festivals. Dr. Hayden mentioned earlier that we're excited about this year's virtual National Book Festival at the very end of September, but the last 20 years of recordings of National Book Festival programs are also available through both the library's website and the library's YouTube channel. So again, you can bump into the library on YouTube, which is actually very cool. You can find all kinds of author talks and opportunities. Really, I mean, it's extraordinary how much is available.
And this is all available to the general public on their iPad. They can download the music, download the video.
LOC.gov. And that's what we want everybody to know. It's a portal and it'll take you a lot of places. And as Leanne said, if you have a rainy afternoon and you start looking at one thing, it's free online shopping.
That's right. That's good.
We're running a little low on time here, but Leanne, let me give you another couple minutes. I've been sort of putting myself in the shoes of parents because that's easy for me to do. But I know we have some teachers watching right now who are probably thinking about how very different the online environment will be, the distance learning. And so I'd love to just give you a couple minutes to, you think about this a lot, reflect on what the challenges are going to be and maybe how those challenges might be addressed, generally speaking, but in particular by the library.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. When we all went home in March, one of the things that my team and I started doing was offering online office hours. And all of those office hours were intended to introduce teachers to not only the library's collections and resources, but also provide some strategies for using those resources in either a classroom setting or in a virtual classroom setting. I'm happy to report that we have been recording all of those sessions. So again, if you go to the teachers page on the library's website, you can access those recordings of our online office hours. And you can also access recordings of all of the webinars that we did over the summer. Again, we usually offer summer teacher institutes on site at the library for teachers. And this year we couldn't do that. So we did them virtually as hour-long webinars that introduce teachers to strategies for teaching with primary sources, strategies for digging into the library's collections, strategies for incorporating materials into all kinds of distance learning applications and opportunities as well. And all of those webinars have been recorded and are available through the professional development section of the library's website. We're right now in the midst of planning for what we're going to offer during the fall and in the winter. And what was great about all the webinars we did over the spring and summer was that about half, which is, statistically amazing, about half of the teachers who participated in those webinars also completed surveys to tell us not only what they thought of the event, but also what more they would like to see from us. So we've got terrific feedback from teachers that we're making great use of as we're planning for the fall and for the winter in terms of our professional development offerings. So those resources are also available to teachers. And earlier in our talk, Dr. Hayden mentioned the Ask a Librarian function. And I can't stress that enough. Just about every page on the library's website will give you a link to Ask a Librarian. And if you're on the teachers page of the library's website, when you click that Ask a Librarian link, it comes directly to my team. So if there are teachers out there who are developing their lesson plans and they would like some suggestions on approaches or resources, by all means, send a note to Ask a Librarian, and we are happy to provide suggestions, provide links to other resources and opportunities. And also, some of those opportunities that we would probably link you to relate to the Teaching with Primary Sources grant program. Through this grant program, the library receives an appropriation from Congress that allows us to distribute funds to libraries, to schools, to cultural institutions, museums, and so forth, to make good use of the library's digitized collections. To date, we have funded regional projects literally all over the country, and many of those projects have developed resources for teachers in different communities at different grade levels, and we can point teachers to things that other teachers have done and other opportunities, and encourage them to also consider applying for grants for some of the projects that they are interested in developing. We love partnerships that involve local libraries with schools and other cultural institutions and communities that really want to make use of the library's materials that have a connection back to those communities.
Thank you, Leanne. We're just about out of time, and I'm gonna invite the librarian to close and hope that she answers the question about the most surprising thing that she met in the library. But let me do just a quick commercial in closing for myself. Number one, we have just barely scratched the surface in this conversation. I could go on all day about some of the wonderful resources the library has available. I do want to highlight one or two. I've participated over the many years in something called the Veterans Oral History Project that the library has run. And the reason I highlight that in particular is because the Veterans Oral History Project involves citizens, just you and me, going out and interviewing veterans, in some cases collecting memorabilia that they're willing to part with, videoing those interviews. And there is a huge library available of this oral history by the guys who literally stormed the beach at Okinawa, or the young people who've come home from Desert Storm and those kinds of things. Just an incomparable thing. And for any teachers who are watching, a wonderful opportunity actually to involve students in interviewing veterans about their experiences. Some of the more moving experiences I've had as a congressman has been getting some older veterans to reminisce about World War II, about Korea. And it's just an incredibly enriching thing. And of course, we're losing that World War II generation. In a couple of years, we'll probably not have anybody around who was of that greatest generation. So I highlight that. And the other thing I would say is there will come a time when we can be in person again. All too often people visit Washington, D.C., and they don't think to put the library on their itinerary, which is a terrible mistake because it's right across the street from the Capitol. And apart from being one of the most amazing architectural gems in Washington, D.C., the Jefferson Building, if you step into the Jefferson Building and you look at the reading room there, it is a feeling that I suppose is only rivaled by being in St. Peter's in Rome, or maybe even across the street in the Rotunda of the Capitol. But you really must visit the library, both just for the experience of being there, but because you can walk through, the librarian was listing some of this stuff, but I'll never forget walking through Thomas Jefferson's library, yes, more or less reproduced precisely the way it was at Monticello. So you can stand there and look at the books that Thomas Jefferson was reading while he was writing the Declaration of Independence. Right. So that's my last commercial. When we all do get back to traveling, and we will, back to our points about history, we will get back to visiting Washington, D.C. It's really important that people make a little bit of time to just stop by the Library of Congress, because you will be inspired and amazed by what is your library. So with that, I'm going to thank Leanne. Thank you so much for doing that. And Dr. Hayden, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, you asked what was the most surprising thing that I found. And I, as a librarian, I knew a lot about the Library of Congress and the collections. The most surprising thing was that we have hair, H-A-I-R. And you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. So they bring out this box, and there were 4 pieces of locks of Thomas Jefferson's hair. We also have a lock of Beethoven's hair, and just a little bit of Sigmund Freud because we have his papers. So we're thinking about doing an exhibit called Body Parts.
Very, very good. I'm envisioning that if I can just get that little piece of Thomas Jefferson's hair and 10 books on genetic reproduction, I could rebuild Thomas Jefferson.
There you go. There you go. But we just thank you so much, and we want everyone to just engage with the Library of Congress, and we're your partners during this time and always.
Well, Dr. Hayden, thank you so much for making yourself available. And Leanne, thank you for joining up. And I'm going to reiterate that there are online resources, but also the ability to call your people up or go online and get in contact with your people for guidance on the educational side, because that's going to be really, really important in the coming weeks and months. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. And Dr. Hayden, thank you for being our guest today.
Oh, thank you. And Leanne, too.
Thank you.